Hello and welcome. And with me today is Ankush Jain, who is a 3 Principles coach. And we're going to be talking today about building your coaching practice. So first of all, hello and welcome, Ankush. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your story of how you became a coach.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks for having me on your show. So I'm 34 years old. Some people tell me I look a lot younger. I went to a very, very typical career path, if you like. I went to school, went to university, got a graduate job on a graduate scheme, and worked my way up, over the first few years. And I kind of had this secret life, if you like. And my secret life was I was really into personal development, but I didn't really talk to people about it. And that was kind of my only real hobby, if you like. I mean, I did other things, but I was hooked, If there was a great book that could help me, if there was an audio program, whatever else, I was into it. And I even got to the stage where I'd kind of had this, unofficial book club or whatever, where I would actually read or listen to something, and I would tell not my boss, but my boss's boss, and then he would listen to it, and then we'd talk about it. So I was really into that, but it never occurred to me to be a coach. And I would have given you all sorts of reasons if you go back to that time about why I couldn't be a coach or why I didn't want to be a coach. But if I'm really honest, and it's easy to look in hindsight, I was just scared of being visible. Because it was very much my thing. I like to improve myself, but I didn't want anyone else to see my flaws or point out like, well, why are you coaching us? Because your life isn't perfect. But about 4 years ago, after, being in the self-development world, if you like, for over a decade, I was looking to do something different with my career. There's all this talk about finding your vision, finding your purpose. And I was kind of being impacted by that sort of stuff. And I was like, well, I haven't really found it yet. And I really, really thought hard. I spent a full weekend. I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. And so I spent a full weekend thinking and didn't come up with an answer. And everything that I thought of didn't make sense. And funnily enough, I never thought of coach. That wasn't even in my kind of mind at that time. But the following day, I went to work and I thought, well, I'm no worse off than I was on Friday. Come home, I'm cooking, and I had this insight, had this kind of eureka moment of like, you should be a coach. And I thought, oh, okay, well, and I don't know if you've heard of the book From Good to Great. They've got this hedgehog concept, which are 3 things about what companies should do to be great. And it applies to individuals. And it was, I think one of them was, is it something that you're good at? And I thought, well, yeah, I like helping people, and my friends come to me for advice, and I'm doing that. Is it something that you really enjoy? And I'm like, yeah, I really enjoy this. And is it something you can make money at? Well, I think there are coaches out there that are making money. So it just seemed to fit. And about a week later, about 10 days later, I'd spent, a small fortune on a coach training program. And at the time, I was very naive and thought, oh, I'll do this coach training. And even before it's finished, within a few months, I will be coaching full time. And it didn't quite work out like that. And it's been a wonderful journey over the last 4 years. And I've learned far, far more than I ever thought I would. I kind of almost feel like everything up until that point was where my real learning started. But here I am now, 4 years later. I'm working full time as a coach. I have clients, countries all around the world, and I have to pinch myself sometimes because it's what I always wanted.
You see, and that I think will be, for many people listening, they'll, particularly coaches, will be thinking, crikey. So, you in a way are relatively new into the world of coaching, and it sounds like you've got a thriving client base and a thriving practice. So I don't know where you want to start, but what I guess there's 2 things. It's like, what would you say are some of the pointers you can give people, and maybe what are some of the pitfalls as well for coaches who would also love to have a coaching practice that could be their main source of income?
Well, I'll start with a pitfall first. And this is something that I say to all coaches, and I don't want to put anyone off coaching. I think this is the best profession in the world. I love it. But I start with the pitfalls. And one of the pitfalls is, if you're in this to make money, don't bother, right? There's a far, far, far easier ways of making money than coaching. And I find that people that are in this for the money don't make any money, or if they do, they get bored very quickly. It's not that kind of profession in my opinion. It's a vocation. It's like you wouldn't think someone is a doctor because they like money, right? There's something more to it, and I think it's the same with coaching. The other big pitfall I tell people is this is going to take far longer than you think. Now, like I said, I was naive. I thought within 3 months I would quit my full-time job and I'd be coaching full-time. And here's a disclaimer. There are people that have done that. So there are people that have had a full-time job and within 3 months, they've got a full coaching practice. But from what I've seen, they tend to be the exceptions. There tend to be some extenuating circumstances. Often they're senior people. They've had a lot of experience. They've got a big network. For most people, it will take a few years. And I wish I'd known that when I started out. And I think that's a good thing, because if you can stay the course, then you will be successful. But it often takes longer than you think. So those are kind of a couple of the pitfalls. And I say that if I ever speak, because I get asked by a lot of new coaches or people that want to be coaches, well, we see you're doing this. And I post a lot on social media, and they'll say, well, we want to do the same thing. How can we do it? And I kind of start with those pitfalls first. And I also say, by the way, most coaches aren't making money. So, and there's a statistic by the CTI or something, very misquoted, but in essence, you're not making even the average salary in the UK or the US if you're a typical coach. So
yeah, so I think that's really good just as a starting point, isn't it? So there's a couple of things which I think will resonate for a lot of people who are coaches. Is one, is you're kind of drawn to it as a vocation. So don't look at it like you're going to make a load of money and like this is a way to get your yachts and to sail the world. That's not how it's going to work. And I guess secondly is be realistic about the amount of time it will take to build up a practice. And I guess those are the two things to consider before you hand in your resignation letter of your current job. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and specifically on handing in your resignation letter, I mean, it took me 2 years before I handed in my notice, almost to the day, from when I decided I wanted to be a coach and to when I handed in my letter of resignation. And in those 2 years, I was already coaching. I was already getting paid good money from clients that I had. I was already starting to get known. There were lots of things I was already doing by that stage. And it just made sense to go, okay, now I'm running out of time. It makes sense to go full time, because either I'm going to have to pull back on the coaching, or my job is really going to suffer.
So that's really interesting, because that actually mirrors in a way my journey as well. I had a full-time job, which I started whittling down. I was very lucky. My employer was happy for me to do that. And I started building up my coaching practice until it got to a stage where it was choosing. I couldn't serve both. So I had to choose in the end to become a coach full-time, which was a great decision to make. And for me, it just meant that I'd actually built up credibility whilst I was still getting paid in another job. So it kind of, it felt very congruent for me, and a really good foundation for my coaching practice. So it sounds like that's a good thing to consider if you're starting out as a coach. You don't have to do it full time straight away.
Yeah, and you know what? I wouldn't have said this a few years ago, but you're right about the amount of time it takes as well. And I know I've spoken to people who have said, well, you know what? I'm working part time and I've got kids to look after, but I have about 4 hours on a Thursday. I'd like to be a coach. And before I would try and help people and say, okay, well, what can you do in the 4 hours? And what I'm realizing more and more is you're going to make it very difficult for yourself, only giving that much time to trying to build this as a vocation, as a practice. And, you know, if you're working full time, you're going to have to put some hours in, you know, like any business. You know, if you wanted to open a bookshop, or you wanted to open importing some of these weird hoverboards from China, which are all burning down at the moment. If you were doing any kind of business, you'd need to put some time and effort in. And coaching is exactly the same. You know, this is not, it moves from helping your friends out and just being a friendly ear, which is one thing, to being a professional as a coach. It is a business. You are a professional. And so it takes time. And so for me, it really makes sense to put that time in. I was pretty much working 2 jobs for a long time. Every evening I'd come home. I mean, my routine was go to work, come home, get home at 6, give myself half an hour to get some food, normally quite unhealthy, I'm afraid to admit. And I'd have my first coaching call at 6:30. And then I'd coach for an hour and a half. I'd have a half an hour break. And then I'd have another coaching call. And I did that most weekdays. And I said I wouldn't work weekends. And then I'd end up working weekends as well. But that's kind of what was required for me. Lots of practice, lots of experience to then get to the stage of, I'm going to do this full time and get paid. And I've seen so many, and I'm not saying it can't happen, but every person I've come across that said, I want to be a coach, and right at the beginning, they quit their jobs. They put themselves in a situation where they often needed the money. So they got more desperate, and it was kind of like a vicious cycle. And then they end up going back to a job, which makes them feel like they're going even slower, as opposed to people like yourself who have taken time, built up their coaching practice, done things, maybe gone part-time, and built it up slowly. Great.
Well, we're going to pause here because the second part of what we're going to be talking about is very much based then on, if you are a coach, how can you then build up your practice? But what I'm really heartened by with this, Ankush, is that, my heart sinks sometimes when I see some of the claims made by people who say, become a coach, it's easy, you can charge thousands of pounds an hour. It's really heartening just to speak to you, to say, let's just be realistic about this. It's a business. It's about developing credibility. It's about taking time. And it's a wonderful, wonderful profession to be involved with, but just take your time to get there, to be a coach. And that's what I'm hearing you saying. Is that right?
Absolutely.
So we'll come back in part 2, where we'll talk about how can you build your practice.